My name is Dr. Amy Park, and at 33, I thought I had it all. A fulfilling career as a pediatrician, a beautiful suburban home, and a husband, David, whom I adored. We'd been married for 5 years, and while life wasn't always perfect, it was ours. We navigated the usual bumps in the road with laughter and understanding. We were building a life together, brick by brick, filled with dreams of children and a comfortable future. I loved coming home to him after a long day at the hospital. We'd cook dinner together, talk about our day, and just enjoy each other's company. Then Deborah arrived. Deborah was David's mother, my mother-in-law. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of expensive handbags, perfectly coiffed hair, and unwavering opinions. She was also incredibly wealthy, having inherited a sizable fortune from her late husband. Initially, I tried to be accommodating, to build a good relationship with her. I understood the importance of family, and I wanted David to be happy. But Deborah made it difficult, nearly impossible. Her visits became more frequent, her criticisms sharper, and her presence increasingly suffocating. What started as seemingly innocent suggestions quickly turned into demands. She questioned my cooking, my decorating, my parenting skills, despite us not even having children yet, and even my choice of friends. It felt like I was constantly being judged, constantly falling short of her impossible standards. Little did I know that her subtle jabs and undermining comments were just the beginning of a calculated campaign to dismantle my marriage and ultimately, my life. The happy home I described to you became a battleground, and Deborah was always ready for war. Looking back, it's easy to romanticize the past, to remember only the good times. But truly, before Deborah, our life was idyllic. David worked as an architect, designing beautiful homes and commercial spaces. He was passionate about his work, and his enthusiasm was contagious. We'd spend hours discussing his projects, brainstorming ideas, and celebrating his successes. Evenings were spent curled up on the couch, reading books, watching movies, or simply talking. We shared a comfortable silence, a deep understanding that words weren't always necessary. Our weekends were filled with adventures. We loved hiking in the nearby mountains, exploring local farmers' markets, and trying new restaurants. We enjoyed hosting dinner parties for our friends, filling our home with laughter and good food. We dreamed of filling it with the sounds of children someday. My career as a pediatrician was equally fulfilling. I loved working with children, helping them heal, and watching them grow. It was a challenging job, but incredibly rewarding. I felt like I was making a difference in the world, one tiny patient at a time. David was always supportive of my demanding schedule, understanding the importance of my work. He'd bring me flowers at the hospital, cook dinner when I was too tired, and simply listen when I needed to vent. We were a team, partners in every sense of the word. We had built a foundation of love, trust, and mutual respect. A foundation that Deborah was determined to tear down, brick by brick. The scary thing is, she did it so slowly, so methodically, that I barely noticed it happening until it was too late. Deborah's arrival was initially framed as a desire to help out. She claimed she was lonely after her husband's passing and wanted to be more involved in David's life. David, being the dutiful son, welcomed her with open arms. He failed to see the subtle ways she began to manipulate our lives. It started small, offering to redecorate our living room, which she deemed too bland, suggesting a new cleaning service, because, according to her, I wasn't keeping the house tidy enough, and insisting on cooking dinner every Sunday, because my meals were uninspired. These seemingly innocent gestures quickly escalated. She started showing up unannounced, rearranging furniture, and offering unsolicited advice on everything from my wardrobe to my career choices. She even started questioning my medical expertise, citing articles she'd read online. "Are you sure that's the best treatment for little Timmy, Amy?" I read on the internet that. It was infuriating. David, blinded by his love for his mother, couldn't see how controlling she was being. He dismissed my concerns as overreactions and told me I was being too sensitive. He'd say things like, "She's just trying to help, Amy. You know how she is." But I knew. I knew that Deborah wasn't just trying to help. She was trying to take over. She was trying to replace me. And slowly, but surely, she was succeeding. The laughter that once filled our home was replaced with tension and resentment. The comfortable silence we shared became strained and awkward. The team we once were started to crumble under the weight of Deborah's constant interference. The home that was once my sanctuary became a cage. The most insidious part of Deborah's plan was how she turned David against me, little by little. It wasn't overt. She never directly told him to dislike me. Instead, she planted subtle seeds of doubt, playing on his insecurities and exploiting his desire to please her. She'd make comments like, "David, darling, are you sure Amy isn't working too hard? You look so tired." A wife should be there to support her husband, not run him ragged. Or, "Amy's so dedicated to her career, it's admirable, really. But I do worry about when you two will find time for a family. These things are important, you know." She also started subtly undermining my authority in our home. If I made a decision about something, she'd question it in front of David, making me feel like I was being interrogated. "Are you sure that's the best way to handle that, Amy? David always did it this way growing up." She constantly compared me to herself, implying that I wasn't as good of a wife or homemaker as she was. David, initially resistant to her manipulations, slowly started to change. He became more critical of me, echoing Deborah's concerns. He started questioning my decisions, taking his mother's side in arguments, and withdrawing emotionally. He was no longer my partner, my teammate. He was becoming Deborah's puppet. I felt like I was losing him, bit by bit, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The worst part was the loneliness. I was living in my own home, with the man I loved, but I felt completely alone, trapped in a battle I couldn't win. It was like watching my marriage slowly die, and Deborah was the one holding the knife. The seeds Deborah planted were small at first, almost imperceptible. They were disguised as concern, as motherly advice, but they were carefully chosen to exploit David's deepest insecurities. He always worried about providing for me, about being a good husband. Deborah honed in on that. She would subtly question my commitment to the marriage, hinting that my career was more important to me than our relationship. "David, darling, you work so hard," she'd say, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I just worry that Amy's always at the hospital. Does she ever have time for you? A man needs attention, you know." Or, if I missed a family event due to work, she'd make sure to mention it, her voice laced with disappointment. "It's a shame Amy couldn't make it. Family is so important. I hope she's not neglecting you, dear." She also played on his desire for children. We had always planned to start a family, but we wanted to wait until we were both ready. Deborah knew this, and she used it against me. "David, you'd make such a wonderful father," she'd coo. "It's a shame Amy's so focused on her career. Time is ticking, you know. Women have a biological clock." These comments, seemingly innocent on the surface, slowly eroded David's trust in me. He started to resent my long hours, my dedication to my career. He began to question my love for him, my commitment to our marriage. He started to believe Deborah's lies. The small seeds of doubt she planted grew into a poisonous vine, strangling the love and trust that had once bound us together. And I, blinded by my own naivete, didn't see it happening until it was too late. The arguments became more frequent, the silences longer, and the distance between us wider. We were drifting apart, and Deborah was the one steering the ship. As David distanced himself, the conflict between Deborah and me escalated. I could no longer bite my tongue. I started standing up to her, challenging her criticisms, and defending my choices. Every Sunday dinner became a battleground. I'd try to have a normal conversation, but Deborah would always find a way to inject her negativity, her subtle jabs disguised as concern. One Sunday, she criticized my cooking again, saying my roast chicken was dry. I snapped. "Deborah, I'm tired of your constant criticism," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "If you don't like my cooking, then don't eat it." David, instead of defending me, sided with his mother. "Amy, don't be rude," he said, his voice cold. she's just trying to be helpful. That was it. That was the moment I realized how far gone he was. He was no longer on my side. He was completely under Deborah's control. The arguments between David and me became more frequent and more intense. We argued about everything: Deborah, my career, our finances, our future. The love and understanding that had once defined our relationship were replaced with resentment and bitterness. We were living in the same house, but we were miles apart. The silence between us was deafening, filled with unspoken accusations and simmering anger. I tried to talk to him, to explain how Deborah was manipulating us, but he refused to listen. He accused me of being jealous, of trying to turn him against his mother. He couldn't see the truth, even when it was staring him in the face. The distance between us grew wider and wider, until we were practically strangers. And I knew, deep down, that our marriage was doomed. The battle with Deborah had become a war, and I was losing. The breaking point came during a discussion about a new car. My old one was reliable but, well, old. I had been saving up for months, carefully budgeting so I could buy a practical, fuel-efficient vehicle. Deborah, of course, had other ideas. She insisted that I needed a luxury SUV, something befitting a doctor's wife. She even offered to help with the down payment, which I knew came with strings attached. I politely declined, explaining that I wanted to pay for the car myself and that I preferred something more practical. Deborah scoffed. "Honestly, Amy, you're so stubborn," she said, rolling her eyes. "David deserves a wife who appreciates the finer things in life." David, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke up. "Actually, Amy, I think Mom has a point," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "We should get something nicer. It's an investment." I was stunned. It wasn't about the car, it was about control. It was about Deborah trying to dictate every aspect of my life, and David letting her. We erupted into a huge fight, the biggest we'd ever had. I accused David of being a mama's boy, of letting Deborah run our lives. He accused me of being ungrateful, of not appreciating all that Deborah had done for us. The argument escalated until I was screaming, and he was yelling, and Deborah was sitting there, smirking, clearly enjoying the show. In the heat of the moment, I said things I regretted, things I can't take back. But I also spoke the truth. I told David that I couldn't live like this anymore, that I couldn't be married to a man who put his mother before his wife. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. That night, I slept in the guest room. And the next morning, I started looking for a divorce lawyer. I knew it was over. Deborah had finally won. She had successfully destroyed my marriage, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. Or so I thought. The thought of revenge hadn't even crossed my mind yet. But it would. Oh, it would. The divorce proceedings were a nightmare. Deborah was involved every step of the way, whispering in David's ear, manipulating him into making unreasonable demands. She hired the best lawyers, ensuring that I got as little as possible. It wasn't about the money, though, it was about control. She wanted to punish me, to make me suffer for daring to challenge her. David, completely under her sway, became a stranger. He was cold, distant, and unfeeling. He accused me of being greedy, of trying to take him for everything he had. He seemed to forget the 5 years we had spent together, the love we had shared. It was as if Deborah had erased me from his memory, replacing me with a caricature of a gold-digging wife. Deborah, of course, reveled in my misery. She attended every court hearing, sitting in the front row, a smug smile on her face. She would make snide comments to me in the hallway, gloating about her victory. "I always knew you weren't good enough for David," she'd whisper, her voice dripping with venom. "He's better off without you." The legal battles dragged on for months, draining me emotionally and financially. I had to sell our house, move into a small apartment, and work extra shifts at the hospital just to make ends meet. It felt like my entire life was falling apart. I was exhausted, heartbroken, and utterly defeated. But even in my darkest moments, a tiny spark of anger began to flicker within me. It was a small ember at first, barely noticeable, but it grew stronger with each passing day. It was the seed of revenge, the promise of retribution. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I knew that someday, somehow, I would make Deborah pay for what she had done. The divorce was her victory, but it was also the beginning of her downfall. She just didn't know it yet. And neither did I, not fully. The plan would come later, born of desperation and a touch of luck. Months after the divorce was finalized, I was helping my friend Sarah clean out her attic. Sarah's family had been close to David's family for years, and when David's father passed away, Sarah's mom helped Deborah sort through his belongings. In the chaos, an old computer belonging to David's father ended up in Sarah's attic. Sarah, knowing I was a doctor, asked if I could wipe the hard drive before she donated it. As I was going through the files, I stumbled upon a hidden folder. Curiosity piqued, I opened it. Inside were old security camera recordings from the Park family estate. At first, I dismissed them as mundane footage of the grounds, the pool, the driveway. But then I saw them. The footage was grainy and dated, but the figures were unmistakable. Deborah and the family driver, a man named Joseph, engaged in clandestine meetings, hushed conversations, and stolen kisses. The dates on the files spanned back years, even before David and I met. It was clear, Deborah had been having an affair with Joseph for a long, long time. The computer had video files that Deborah thought were deleted years ago. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. The hypocrisy was staggering. Deborah, who had judged me so harshly, who had preached about the sanctity of marriage, had been living a lie for years. The anger I had suppressed during the divorce resurfaced, stronger than ever before. This wasn't just about my ruined marriage anymore. This was about justice, about exposing Deborah for the fraud she was. It was like the universe had handed me the perfect weapon, the key to unlocking her carefully constructed facade. The spark of revenge that had been smoldering within me suddenly burst into flame. Now, I had a target, a plan, and the means to execute it. The game had changed. It was no longer about healing, it was about retribution. It was time for Deborah to face the consequences of her actions. The anger I felt was a burning fire, consuming my thoughts, driving my actions. I couldn't let Deborah get away with what she had done. She had destroyed my marriage, ruined my life, and reveled in my pain. Now, it was my turn. But I knew I couldn't act rashly. I needed a plan, a strategy, a way to expose Deborah's secret that would inflict maximum damage. I spent weeks meticulously plotting my revenge. I considered different options, weighing the pros and cons of each. Should I confront her directly? Should I tell David? Should I leak the information to the media? Each option had its risks and rewards. I decided that the most effective approach would be to strategically disseminate the information, targeting those who would be most affected by it, her family, her friends, her business associates. First, I needed to make sure the evidence was irrefutable. The security footage was grainy, and the dates were difficult to read. I enlisted the help of a tech-savvy friend to enhance the video and verify the dates. Once I had a clear, concise presentation of the evidence, I began to identify my targets. I made a list of everyone who was important to Deborah, everyone whose opinion she valued. Then, I started crafting my message. I wanted to expose Deborah's affair without implicating myself directly. I needed to create a narrative that would be believable and compelling, one that would leave no room for doubt. I decided to anonymously send copies of the video footage and a carefully worded letter to each of my targets. The letter would highlight Deborah's hypocrisy, her judgmental attitude, and the devastating impact her actions had had on my life. It would be a carefully calculated act of revenge, designed to shatter her carefully constructed world. I planned to send everything at once, a coordinated attack that would leave Deborah reeling and defenseless. The game was afoot, and I was ready to play. While the security footage was damning, I knew I needed more to ensure my plan succeeded. I couldn't rely solely on grainy, years-old recordings. I needed corroborating evidence, something that would solidify Deborah's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. I started digging. I remembered Deborah always being strangely protective of Joseph, the driver. She'd insist on him driving her everywhere, even for short trips that I offered to take her on. I also recalled a few instances where I'd overheard hushed phone conversations, Deborah's voice unusually soft and secretive. Now, these seemingly insignificant details took on a whole new meaning. I started subtly questioning people who had worked at the Park family estate over the years, former housekeepers, gardeners, even other drivers. It was a delicate dance. I couldn't reveal what I knew, but I needed to glean any information that might support my case. One former housekeeper, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, vaguely recalled Deborah and Joseph taking frequent extended lunches together. Another gardener mentioned seeing them sharing intimate moments in the garden, away from prying eyes. While these accounts were circumstantial, they added another layer of credibility to the security footage. Then, I struck gold. While going through some old financial records, which I still had access to due to a lingering legal issue, I discovered a series of suspicious payments made to Joseph over the years. They were disguised as bonuses or gifts, but the amounts were substantial, far exceeding what a driver would typically receive. This was it, the smoking gun. The financial records, combined with the security footage and the witness accounts, created an irrefutable case against Deborah. I had everything I needed. The stage was set. The letters were written. The evidence was compiled. It was time to unleash my revenge. The countdown had begun. The day I mailed the letters was surreal. It was like releasing a swarm of wasps, knowing they would sting and inflict pain, but also knowing that the target deserved it. I addressed each envelope carefully, ensuring they reached the intended recipients: Deborah's sister, her closest friends from the country club, several members of the charity board she sat on, and even a few of her business partners. I debated whether or not to send one to David. In the end, I decided against it. He was already so deeply under Deborah's influence, I doubted he would believe it, and it would only cause him more pain. I used a generic return address and paid for the postage in cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. Once the letters were in the mailbox, there was nothing left to do but wait. The anticipation was agonizing. I knew it would only be a matter of time before the information reached Deborah, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and satisfaction. I didn't contact anyone directly. I let the letters do the work. I wanted the news to spread organically, to create a wildfire of gossip and speculation that would engulf Deborah's world. I imagined the phone calls, the hushed conversations, the shocked expressions. I envisioned Deborah's carefully constructed facade crumbling around her, revealing the ugly truth beneath. To ensure maximum impact, I also sent an anonymous tip to a local gossip blog, hinting at a scandal involving a prominent socialite and her driver. I didn't provide any specific details, but I knew the blog would investigate, and it wouldn't take them long to connect the dots. I wanted the story to reach a wider audience, to expose Deborah's hypocrisy to the entire community. I knew this was a risky move, but I was willing to take the chance. The stakes were high, but so was the potential reward. It was time for Deborah to pay for her sins. The waiting game had begun. The fallout was swift and devastating. Within days, Deborah's world began to crumble. The letters had hit their mark, igniting a firestorm of gossip and speculation. Her phone rang nonstop with calls from shocked family members, betrayed friends, and concerned business partners. The charity board demanded her resignation. Her closest friends ostracized her. Even her sister, who had always been her staunchest ally, turned against her. The gossip blog picked up the story, running a series of articles that detailed Deborah's affair with Joseph, complete with blurry screenshots from the security footage. The story went viral, spreading like wildfire across social media. Deborah became a pariah, the subject of ridicule and scorn. Her reputation, which she had so carefully cultivated for decades, was shattered beyond repair. Her social standing plummeted. Her business relationships soured. She lost everything that had been important to her: her friends, her status, her power. Even David, finally realizing the truth about his mother, distanced himself from her. He was furious, not only at Deborah for her infidelity but also at himself for being so blind to her manipulations. He called me, his voice filled with remorse, apologizing for not believing me, for letting Deborah ruin our marriage. I didn't offer him forgiveness. It was too late for that. The personal consequences for Deborah were immense. She became isolated and withdrawn, rarely leaving her house. Joseph, the driver, was fired and disappeared from her life. She was left alone to face the wreckage of her shattered world. My revenge was complete. I had successfully exposed Deborah's hypocrisy and destroyed her reputation. But as I watched her world crumble, I couldn't help but wonder if the satisfaction I felt was worth the cost. Had I gone too far? Had I become the very thing I despised? The questions lingered, casting a shadow over my triumph. I didn't witness Deborah's humiliation firsthand. I didn't attend her public shaming, or revel in her downfall. Instead, I saw it from a distance, through the whispers of mutual acquaintances and the reports in the gossip blog. But I knew. I knew the depth of her despair, the extent of her isolation. I imagined her alone in her mansion, surrounded by the trappings of wealth but utterly devoid of human connection. One day, I received a package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked envelope. Inside was a single photograph, a recent picture of Deborah, taken from afar. She looked gaunt and haggard, her eyes hollow and her face etched with lines of sorrow. She was a shadow of her former self, a far cry from the impeccably dressed, self-assured woman who had once terrorized my life. The photograph was a stark reminder of the consequences of my actions. I had wanted to make Deborah pay, and I had succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. But seeing her reduced to this state, stripped of her dignity and her pride, didn't bring me the satisfaction I had expected. Instead, it filled me with a profound sense of sadness and regret. I also heard, indirectly, that Deborah had tried to reach out to David, begging for his forgiveness. But he refused to speak to her. He was still grappling with the realization that his own mother had been manipulating him for years, that she had deliberately destroyed his marriage. He couldn't forgive her, not yet. The disintegration of Deborah's carefully constructed image was complete. The mask had been ripped away, revealing the flawed, vulnerable human being beneath. And as I watched her world crumble, I realized that revenge, no matter how justified, is never truly satisfying. It leaves a void, a hollowness that can never be filled. I had won the battle, but I had also lost something in the process, my own sense of peace. The victory felt hollow. In the months that followed, I spent a lot of time reflecting on my actions. Had I done the right thing? Was revenge ever truly justified? I grappled with feelings of guilt and regret, wondering if I had become the very thing I despised, a manipulative, vindictive person. There were moments when I felt a surge of satisfaction, a sense of justice served. Deborah had ruined my life, and I had made her pay. But those moments were fleeting, quickly replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line, that I had allowed my anger to consume me. I also realized that my revenge hadn't brought me the closure I had hoped for. It hadn't erased the pain of my divorce, or healed the wounds that Deborah had inflicted. Instead, it had left me feeling empty and hollow, haunted by the consequences of my actions. I thought about reaching out to David, to try to explain myself, to apologize for what I had done. But I knew it was pointless. Our relationship was beyond repair. He would never be able to forgive me for what I had done to his mother, even if she deserved it. I also considered whether I should feel guilty. Deborah was the original aggressor, and if she hadn't meddled in my marriage, none of this would have happened. Perhaps I was simply fighting fire with fire. But even that rationale didn't bring me comfort. Ultimately, I came to the conclusion that revenge is a dangerous game, one that ultimately harms the player as much as the target. It's a seductive trap that promises satisfaction but delivers only emptiness and regret. It's a path best avoided, even when the temptation is overwhelming. The long-term impact of my revenge was a constant reminder of the darkness that I was capable of, and the importance of choosing a different path. It took time, but eventually, I started to heal. I focused on my career, pouring my energy into my work as a pediatrician. I found solace in helping children, in making a positive difference in their lives. The joy of seeing a sick child recover, the gratitude of their parents, that was the kind of satisfaction that truly mattered. I also started to rebuild my personal life. I reconnected with old friends, forged new relationships, and discovered new hobbies. I took up painting, joined a hiking club, and even started volunteering at a local animal shelter. I filled my life with activities that brought me joy and purpose. I learned to forgive myself for my mistakes. I acknowledged that I had made choices I regretted, but I refused to let those choices define me. I was determined to move forward, to learn from my experiences, and to create a better future for myself. I never spoke to Deborah again, and I never saw David. But I heard through the grapevine that he had eventually started to heal as well. He sold the family estate, moved to a new city, and started a new chapter in his life. I hoped that he had found peace, that he had learned from his mistakes, and that he was finally free from his mother's influence. As for me, I found happiness again. I met a wonderful man, a kind and compassionate artist who loved me for who I was, flaws and all. We built a life together, filled with love, laughter, and mutual respect. I learned that true happiness comes not from revenge, but from forgiveness, from self-acceptance, and from embracing the present moment. My story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that the pursuit of revenge can lead down a dark and destructive path. But it is also a story of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and the power of new beginnings. I am Dr. Amy Park, and I have survived. And I am finally, truly, free.